Okay, we are live. Yes, sir. We are live.
So when they come in, they'll just come in.
Yes, sir. Yeah. Hey, go ahead on the tag and share. Let's get everybody in. Let's get everybody in on this wonderful. Chi, how are you? Go ahead on the tag and share. Let's get everybody in on this wonderful, wonderful Wednesday. Man, I'm excited about what's about to happen. I'm excited. Go ahead on. Let's tag and share. Let's get everybody in. So man, how you been? How your day been?
It's been going productive, really busy as
Always.
as always. Um, Someone challenged me to say, don't use the word busy, use the word productive. Sometimes busy people never get stuff done. So I try to stay busy and productive.
That's great, man. Hey, well, listen, I'm telling you, I'm excited about I'm excited about the broadcast today, and I'm excited about. Want to say good afternoon and once again, welcome to, that's right, the Greg James Community Show right here on Hallelujah 95.3 FM. Hey, it's a wonderful Wednesday. So much is going on in our beautiful city. Want to give a big shout out to all of you that are joining us online. Want to say, Marcus Manning, how are you, sir? Want to give a big shout out to Stephanie, Embracing Gains. How are you? Want to say hello to Jonathan Rush. But listen, I want you to go ahead on, for those of you on our virtual platforms, go ahead on and tag and share. We're going to be talking about what is important in our community, what's important in the city, what's important really around the nation, because it's one of the most critical times ever in our place, and that is, it's critical that we get the vote out. And I'm excited about who's going to be joining me today. I want to say good afternoon to Yvonne Stewart. How are you? I want to say good afternoon to you. Go ahead on the tag and share. Let's get everybody tuned in, and we're going to be excited to talk to our supervisor of elections, Mr. Mark Early. He's going to be joining us. And on the way is none other than the conscious chick herself. That's Sister Chris. And in the studio with me now is Pastor Stephen Caldwell, who is pastor of the Empowerment Church TLH. How are you, sir?
I'm doing wonderful. Excited to be here. Happy to be alive.
Well, listen, man, I'm excited to have you, and I'm excited, one, for your partnership with Tallahassee Leadership Prayer Breakfast. And it's happening on June the 1st. And believe it or not, after we started doing all of the calculations, putting in all of the church data, the business data, the elected officials, man, we have come to resolve today that we have sold out the event.
Wow. That's amazing.
That's amazing. I mean, people are excited about gathering for prayer, excited about fellowshipping, excited about bringing about unity. So I'm excited about that. It's the gathering of the watchmen. This is your first year partnering with us. How does it feel?
It's exciting. It feels amazing to see the momentum, being able to see it in the ignition phase, and as it's building, it seems like every moment you turn around, you're gaining more partnerships, and the momentum is building. So it's exciting, and it showcases you that there's a need for what's getting ready to take place.
Absolutely. And you know, we want to give a big shout out to Want to give a big shout out to Pastor Stanley Walker
Yes.
and the pastor of Jacob Chapel, Pastor Hagler. We had lunch with him the other day, welcome him to the city. He's excited about being a part of our Tallahassee Leadership Prayer Breakfast. So we're excited about everything that's transpiring in the month of June. So we're going to talk a little more about that because you got a major role in that. And we're talking about that role today because it deals with voters' education.
Absolutely.
And how important is that?
It is so important. And one of the things that we are trying to communicate to everyone that your voice has power. And your voice has power, and we need to translate that into your vote. And a lot of times there's a gap between our voice and our vote. And our goal is just to educate people so that we can fill that gap and so that you can feel as though your voice is heard in the community.
Wow. Hey, well, listen, I'm so delighted that you're leading that initiative with so many of our pastors, and we're having these small meetings, and they're excited about it. But joining us in the studio now is the man himself.
I made it.
He made it. And we're not going to hold it against you that you went to the other station. Not going to hold that against you. But we're going to just say, hallelujah, you're here.
Yeah.
I want to say good afternoon to Mark Early, who's our supervisor of election. How are you, sir?
James, it's great to be here. I'm good. Things are hopping. The election is really already underway, and so we're getting ready, and there's just a lot to do.
And you know, let's talk about it because we're starting early, and I don't think that you can start early enough with getting people educated, getting people engaged. What do you feel like some of the challenges are that we as faith leaders and a community must embrace? Because we've talked and we want to be a part of making sure that this year we raise that percentage of voters getting out.
Yeah, I think it's what y'all were talking about when I just came in. It's getting over that hurdle of making people, or the perception that people have that their voice doesn't count or is not heard. In Florida especially, but right now in Florida and right now in our nation, across the nation, now is the most important time since I've been in elections for people to get out and vote. There's so much misunderstanding, misinformation, and just turmoil, the chaos within our society. The way to quell that and to calm things down and get things back on an even keel is for the majority of people to get out there and vote, get your voice heard. You know, it's our cumulative wisdom out there that brings the success to our nation. But if big segments of our population are not out there getting their voice heard, then that's what leads to these big problems we're currently having.
Well, let me say this, and Stephen, I want you to hop into and I feel like, Mark, you now are going into what year number as the leading the charge for supervisory election.
Yeah, I've been in the elected office. This is my 8th year.
Your 8th year.
I've been in elections for
over 40 years.
Close to 40.
Yeah.
To 40
So in your 8th year, have you ever seen a more vital time in our history where the vote has to matter?
Absolutely not. Like I say, there's the population out there. Everyone is discouraged. They feel downtrodden. They feel like, you know, everyone is doing the bidding of, you know, the powerful and the elite. Get out there, you know, the mass of the population, they need to get out there and get their voice heard. And I hear a lot of times in the community that, you know, and I'm not talking about any specific races or anything like this, but you hear it all the time. You know, none of the candidates are any good. You know, nobody has earned my vote. You know, you're not voting for a candidate. You're voting for yourself and your family's future. And so when you think maybe there are poorer choices than normal, that's the most critical time to get out there and vote. If all the choices are good, you know, it doesn't matter if you get out there and have your say. But when things are critical and it's you know, it's time to really weigh, you know, what's potentially, if you're really thinking about it this way, the lesser of two evils, that's when you really have to pay attention, get out there and vote. And your vote is much more critical in those times. Our nation finds your voice and your own inner wisdom getting out there to the polls and having it expressed. That's when we need you the most. And that's where we are right now.
Wow.
I think that's an amazing point that I think we might need to draw out more, because we live in a society and a culture that is more personality driven.
Yes.
Wow.
Rather than policy oriented. And it is, personality can only take you so far when you come to building and progressing and moving. but you must focus on the issues. And
Right.
if we can connect the dots more with people for them to understand whatever your kitchen table issues are, whatever your concerns are, we can directly correlate that to some type of policy, whether there is the lack thereof or
yeah,
whether there is one that's already in operation. But I think that's that missing piece, because we're looking for something that it's always exciting, you know,
The
that's
shiny
always
object, absolutely. Yeah.
exhilarating, and we want people to knock us off of our feet. However, it's one of those things that we have to understand that sometimes it may take a while for that policy to turn over, but it will turn over, and we just got to be committed to it.
And I think, Mark, I think you said something that was so pivotal for all of our listeners that's tuning in, whether it's on our virtual platforms or whether you're listening to the airways. It's not about whether there is a good candidate. It's about me exercising my right to vote. And I think this cycle, this election cycle, is a cycle that we must tell people, you must exercise your right to vote. Listen, she has just stepped in, ladies and gentlemen.
The woman of the
seat.
hour.
Why are you like this? Why are you do this?
And I think we're kind of like piggybacking off of something that our supervisor of elections said, that it's imperative that people just get out and vote. And it's imperative that they do it because their voice matters.
I think that's a great statement. I think the word vote has a really heavy connotation because voice equating to value has been our problem. I think that people don't vote because they don't feel valued. I think that happens on the local level. I think when we put people in office, we've got to be able to see value. We've got to see our voices manifest value for our communities. We've got to see people keep their promises. We've got to see the polarity of politics take a chill pill. We've got to see a lot of things before people feel as if what they bring to the voting booth has value. Because unfortunately, what we're dealing with is people who don't feel as if their voice has much value because their understanding is on the line, their trust has been eroded. And so we have a lot of community building to do before we can get consensus building at the booths happen.
Well, I mean, I want to ask you, Mark, and specifically for the African American community in the last 8 years, has there been a major decline in that population
In the turnout?
Yeah.
I think there's been some. I don't think it's been very significant. We'll see this election compared to the last presidential. But frankly, what I'd like to see would be an increase, because like we were saying earlier, this is when it's most dependent upon people getting out there and standing in line. If there's a line, we don't have lines in Leon County, I'm happy to say, but get out there, get into the booth. You're saying the relative value of people's voices or the relative worth of people's opinions. The one place where it's guaranteed to have the same worth is in that ballot booth, in the voting booth, because every person gets one vote in there. In society at large, you might have trouble getting your voice heard. You feel overwhelmed with the other powers that be and the things that are coming to bear on certain problems. But in the voting booth, especially if you can get a whole lot of people to come out, the whole entire community to get out there and get that voice heard, that is when your power really comes to bear. And it may take a little bit of time. And I understand your impatience with some of this, without a doubt. And we're not just talking about the presidential candidates. There's a lot of local politics here that are underway. And frankly, in many ways, your local politics are the most important to your everyday life. So I think we've got a great spread of demographics representing us here at the local level. I think it's one of the things I'm most proud of as an elected official here in Leon County, is that we elect all kinds of people, but it's only if you get out there and get your voice heard. And so that's why I think the importance of, regardless of what you think about every single candidate, somebody's going to get elected. And it may not be your first choice, your second choice, or your third, but somebody's going to be elected. And if you don't put your say into your voice into the hat and get it part of the mix and get it counted, you're going to end up with probably your worst choice.
Let me ask you this, because I know I'm grateful that you carved out time to be with us. I know you got to jump on a statewide call in a few minutes, and you may get a chance to get back. But when is the deadline for registering to vote? And we've been talking about how faith leaders under the leadership of Pastor Stevens and some of our pastors who are ambassadors, how we can engage in looking at the areas where the decrease of voting is. So when is that deadline for?
Yeah, so the deadline for the August primary, which is a very important election, don't just think about November, it's the August 20th primary, is July, I believe it's the 22nd. It's 29 days out from that election. So if you're not registered by July 22nd, then you won't be eligible to vote in the August primary, August 20th. And then it's also 30 days out from the November election to get registered for that one. But if you get registered now, you're registered for all the way through. So get out there and get registered today.
So I do have and you can give me like the side eye. This is too much of a too big of a question. So I'm always intrigued by voter apathy.
Yes.
Always intrigued by the why of, and sometimes it's not apathy in the sense of I don't care. It's more of I just don't want nothing to do with that. The old folks, they'll say in a minute, I don't want nothing to do with that, right? I don't even want my name on that. What is the role in voter systems, particularly in the last few years where there's been such distrust in voting systems?
Okay.
What role do you think that might play in local voter apathy or non-attendance?
Yeah, I think it's part of that concept, that specific concept. I think it's a part of just a slightly bigger perception that you can't trust elections, you can't trust politicians, you can't trust anything. And so it's just this chaos of misinformation is the way I talk about it, and disinformation. Some of it's intentional from higher up powers that can control certain aspects of media. That's why I love to come on these local shows because you all get to the core of the truth here. But I think it's voting systems, first of all, let me say, are absolutely trustworthy. I am on federal boards that oversee this stuff. I just got appointed to the Bipartisan Policy Center for the Elections Task Force on that to make sure that across the nation you can trust elections. But I think it's that bigger picture of just the ugliness in the air, all of the mixed messaging. People are confused. I think they're confused. I think they've kind of thrown up their hands, and there's a lot of things grabbing for people's attention. And so it's in some cases easier just to kind of shut that all out sometimes and just say, you know what, it's too much for me to even to tackle, much less understand. So I think it's the confusion out there more than, I think it's indirect apathy. It's not intentional apathy, but it just gets you this, it's almost like a depression of the vote. You just don't feel good about society and our democracy. And so you don't take part.
And I think that's the biggest challenge. And Mark, I know you got to go. He has to go for a Zoom call, and the office is set up in the back. We're going to be here and get through. But I think Pastor Caldwell and I think Christine, the biggest challenge that you're leading is one, engaging our pastors. Mm-hmm. And we talked about that in our meeting on the other day with some pastors. What do you feel like has to happen to address even what Christine has said and even what the supervisor of election, and for those who are listening, what you think?
I think it is, for many of us as leaders, we can identify what the issues are. And I think we have to have conversations as leaders amongst ourselves to be more solution oriented. What has worked, what isn't working, and developing a more sense of unity amongst us. And if we can come together as a united front, I think that will help translate amongst the people, because we are influencers in and of ourselves. And so if we have leaders who are a part of the education process, I think that's going to translate or help translate in regards to the importance of voting and what policy affects you and how that can determine the outcome of your life over an election period.
I want to ask you this, because you're out there day in and day out, and I know, Mark, you got to go there.
I'll try to get back.
Yeah, I know you're out there day in and day out and you're seeing these communities, you're seeing what they're dealing with, you're hearing the level of distrust that is there. How important do you think faith leaders are in this process?
Well, I heard a maxim a couple of weeks ago that said, "Blessed are the trustworthy, for they shall be trusted." And I think that in this,
Wait. Blessed are the trustworthy, for they shall be. Now, what book that's in?
it ain't in the Proverbs, but you know what it speaks to is the fact that we got a lot of levels of distrust, and let's just have a real conversations. And I'm there with you, being solution oriented and not coming to the table with the issues and the problems, but we got to deal with the issues and the problems because there are many, and it's rolling out into this apathy that we're dealing with. I was just talking with some pastors with the Florida State Primitive Baptist Association.
Okay.
And really rediscovering how the churches were bedrock for social change, for social equity, where gaps in public policy existed. The churches were the lead in charge to make sure that those gaps were filled in education and senior care and caring for the widows and caring for the orphans. We still have remnants of those movements still in existence today, like One Church, One Child. And you have the senior center that's over off the Miracle Hill, which is a ministry of the Florida Primitive Baptist Association, a legacy, if you will. Schools that have been built by the Primitive Baptist and by the Missionary Baptist organizations here in this city, Bond and Griffin and other schools. So there's a legacy of church action that has led to equitable outcomes. But I think in that as well, and it's many factors. It's a lot of it is governmentalization of a lot of community processes, rendering everything to the control of government, and churches on every corner that break because somebody don't like something that the church is doing. So that fractionalism translates.
Absolutely.
It translates into the mindset that people have. So it's a huge undertaking for leaders in this hour to say, oh, unity. Unity has been fractionalized for a long time. And when you get to a place where people don't care about government, they don't care about public policy, that's because they haven't been cared for.
Okay.
And so it's really important for the church, before we get people to the booths and the polls, for leaders of the church to reinstitute care in the churches. Because when we have shepherding and care, then we have an understanding of what it looks like. And then we have a translator that speaks to what it should look like as it relates to government services, public policy, public infrastructure. But that is largely missing. And I think that is a huge lift for new leaders of churches that say, oh, but unity. By his spirit, we can do much. But we also have to address the breaches and the gaps that we inherit from culture. So coming together and making that call to unity, I would ask you, what are some of the things that you see as an up and coming servant leader in this community, leading a flock of faith, of believers in Christ? Let's talk about that. What are you hearing from your members and parishioners?
I think that you've touched on it, and it really roots down to the one word of individualism. And I think and I'm glad you mentioned this, because what we do have to understand that this is not a slingshot approach. I know David had his one rock that he threw at Goliath, but he took up 5 smooth stones, And so I think we have to understand that, number one, it's not a slingshot approach, as you're alluding to, and that is many layers, many factors, many levels of involvement and engagement that it's going to take to move us in the direction that we need to be in. But I think the root of it is individualism. He's talking about no one cares. It's because it's a root issue of individualism, which I believe it's in the church, but it's a cultural issue altogether. And when we once at a time at the church was moving culture, now culture is moving church. So we are often being reactive than we are proactive. And we're stuck in this cycle, and with that, you get to the place of disunification because, because we're so individualistic, if it's not my issue, then I don't want to be a part of it. When oftentimes the scripture does say, love your neighbor as yourself, which means your issue should be my issue. And that, I think, ultimately is the issue, that lack of love, that lack of care, but it's it's a problem of individualism. There is no community.
And I think that these conversations are needed before we can really address the real issues at hand. I think you said something that's key when it comes to politicians, when it comes to elected officials. We hear them saying how much they care. We hear them telling people in their districts and in communities what they want to do if they are elected. And then they are elected. And when they in office, those same communities become desensitized to them because now there's another agenda that they are now mandating. And the people, once again, have become callous to the vote. But yet we're trying to speak to dry bones to say, you got to get up and you got to vote. But here's, I think you said something that has really begun to cause an alarm to go off. Here's the real issue. Issues and individuals. We cannot allow the issues to lose sight, but we cannot allow individuals to manipulate us in this voting process.
So the question that I have, Pastor, is how do we hold, or what measures of accountability are we implementing, or are we continue to levy on those persons as pastors, as politicians, and as everyday people? Because one of the things that I've heard, and I'm going to kind of quote him as best as I can, but Roland Martin, he says elections is the end of one process, but it's the beginning of another. And oftentimes we show up to the booth, we say that's it, or there's an expectation that somebody else is going to carry it. So what are the measures of accountability that we can put in place or that we can strengthen so that essentially elections have consequences?
Well, I'm going to say this, and I'm sure the conscience chick, conscience is going to catch on fire.
Yeah.
And that's coming from James 1:1. So here's the thing. Accountability is something that we all are saying we must do. But then when we go to hold someone accountable, we are criticized. We're crucified. Because why? We're holding you accountable for what you didn't do, but there are other people who are going to crucify us for saying, oh, they just attacking that politician. But no, these are the things you said you was going to do in our community. I'm upset with several right now. And it's not because it deals with me, but because you said what you were going to do in communities that you represented. And as a community advocate, I feel like if I'm calling you, you should answer to hear what it is I've got to say, not avoid me. Okay? So therefore, accountability for elected officials means that we as a whole must know what it is we want for our communities and what it is we expect for you to do for our community. I mean, with all the violence that we've had, and God forbid, we're praying and believing that it's decreasing. But if with all the violence that we've had, there have been so many elected officials in our community saying what they want to do, and they want to be there for us, and they want to make sure they can help implement situations that's going to make our communities better. But where are you? Where were you? Now we're back at the same cycle of election, and now we have to hear your speech again. Now we have to hear you say what you said 2 or 4 years ago, and we wonder how real is that? People are saying, I'm tired of that.
Mhm.
I don't want to hear that.
Mm.
And we're saying we're giving people a pass, all because we don't want to be the one that's holding them accountable to what they should be doing.
Mm.
And we're talking about get out the vote.
Well, you know, first of all, the show ain't long enough. You know, I just have to go back to this epidemic of apathy, right? Because I think that apathy, you know, if you're in a relationship with someone and it stops hot and heavy and you're engaged and involved and you're engaged and involved with one another, you get a sense when infidelity is entering the room. You know, and those things, I think that a number of things have happened on the public level that can be ranked as infidelity, right? Unfaithfulness to the will of the people.
Absolutely.
And that's what I mean when I want to be very clear. But there are some other things that have been great that have happened, right? And so I think you have to, you know, you have to bring out both, right? You have to talk about when it's done well, and then you have to talk about when it's not being done well. And I think that apathy is a mix of hurt and distrust over time because of unrealized expectations, but also ignorance of when things have happened that are good. And I think that you have to have a balance
Yes.
of both, right?
Yes.
If we aren't heralding the good along with calling out the infidelity,
Right.
then we are doing a disservice to our public that trusts us and our public that trusts our processes, right? And so I think as a faith community, again, I go back to you being the primary advocates. But why, Pastor James, are you primary advocates? Because people come to y'all with all the problems, right? They come to y'all with, they can't find no house. They lights off. They churn bad. They can't get this. They can't get that. I can't find it. They come to the faith community because they have reconciled in their mind that this is the place where needs are met. And faith communities in our city have done what? They've done tremendous things. They give people free shoes at the beginning of the year. They create affordable housing for people who need affordable housing. They have done tremendous things. They house food pantries. They have service on a regular basis. But we've got to have a commitment on the advocacy and information part to make sure we call it out the infidelities, but we also are champion when public policy is good and it works.
Right. You know, let me stick a pin in that because I think this is a great place to say this. And this year at our Tallahassee Leadership Prayer Breakfast, the gathering of the Watchmen, we're going to honor some faith leaders that have been serving for well over 30 years. And they have been voices for the community, not just their church, but the community. Because why? The community calls. I mean, I have so many people call me. I'm like, well, is my number on every bathroom at the Shell station? Or where is it? It might be because so many people are calling. I had a young man who called. He didn't know who his commissioner was, but he knew he had a problem in his area. And he called me because he couldn't understand why he couldn't get this done and the people across the street got it done. And I called his commissioner and I'm still calling him. But guess what? I wasn't going to stop because I didn't get him. I made sure that I kept moving until I got his problem solved.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's what faith leaders do. And so we're going to honor some who have been serving for well over 30 years. Pastor Stanley Walker, Pastor R.B. Holmes, Pastor Joseph Wright, Pastor Ernest Farrell, Pastor Judy and Gerald Mandrell have been voices that have been hearing and speaking for those who are faced with many crises. And it goes back to you once again, Christique, that if we're going to get the vote out, if we're going to get the vote out, and if we're going to try to deal with the apathy that we see, we got to figure out what kind of announcement that we're going to make. Listen to what I'm about to say. This is the Holy Ghost here. We got to figure out what kind of announcement we're going to make that's going to have an anointing on it, that's going to cause the people who are filled with apathy to arise to action. Ooh. And I don't know how that's going to happen, but we got to start not allowing the next 90 days to let people tell us anything when it comes to why we should vote for them.
Well, I think Pastor Caldwell made a very good point earlier. What are the things that are being pulled out to say this is what we need to address? We know people are not finding housing that's affordable. Okay, we know that. It is we have a crisis of vacancy here in this community. I think that Tallahassee, Leon County may have either a 2% or 1% vacancy rate. What does that mean? That means there's nothing out there for people to rent affordably, because that's it's a supply demand issue, right? So how are churches responding collectively to that action? Are we allowing this problem to be defined by entities that are outside of our community in terms of approaches? Because with housing, there's two things that as African American communities we have to look at. First of all, actually providing housing to the individual, and second of all, bringing value to the community. So how do we address housing in ways that balances both of those approaches, right? When we talk about economic opportunity, we know that within our communities, the economic mobility rate is way less than it is. And when I say economic mobility, that means the ability of people to earn more money, to escalate or to be promoted or to get and earn more income for their family, right? How are we addressing that as a community being co-opted or in collaboration with the faith-based community? Because that factors definitely into churches, because guess what? They got to pay tithes. And if they ain't got no money to pay tithes or offerings or to render benevolence in church, that's an issue that we as faith-based leaders have to look at and address. What I'm gonna stop.
Yeah, I want to stop and stick a pin because when you said they gotta pay tithe, because I want to say this because a lot of times we have listeners who feel like, oh, I'm not paying my money to no preacher. No, your money helps support so many initiatives that the body of Christ is doing for so many others. So I'm certainly we got to do that. But for those of you who are listening, I want you to know that the church is like the lifeline to every community.
It's okay to say that.
I would argue it should be the lifeline, but I think what we're seeing is a dual apathetic view.
Okay.
Because if we look at our apathy when it comes to voting, let's look at also the apathy when it comes to attendance of church.
Ooh, let's
look at the apathy when it comes to the confidence in the leaders that we have. And so that's where I threw out the question of accountability, because we have to hold everyone accountable. No one is above, accountability, and so I think we should be the lifeline to the community. But we have to be honest to say that we have not always been the lifeline. And once we can be honest with ourselves, as you introduced the conversation, once we can be honest amongst ourselves as pastors to say these were the shortfalls and these were the shortcomings, then we can get to the place where we can actually get to some real life tangible solutions. Because that's really the issue. There are people who don't trust pastors. There are people who don't want to come to church because they have been hurt and church hurt and all of the things we can name. And so I don't think it's a surprise to see what's going on in culture. It's taking place a little bit in the church. I'm not saying that the church is wrong. I'm not saying that the church is bad. I am for the church. And I believe the church is going to stand, and I believe it has had this place. But there are individuals who are hirelings in the church, and we've got to address that too.
I think that is right on point, Pastor Caldwell, because, when you look at, when you look at it, and some people are a lot harsher than I am. I'm eternally optimistic, right? I just believe it's Christ's church, it's God's church. He's going, and the gates of hell will not prevail. Okay, and look, and I want to say that to your listening audience. The gates of hell will not prevail against God's church, but it's got to be God's church.
Yes.
And the thing that we're dealing with here, and it segues into the voting conversation, right? Because if I'm not being cared for and shepherded in the flock that I am a part of, then the opposite of being cared for and shepherded is being pimped and manipulated.
Wow.
Right.
And then you want to take the influence you have and tell me to vote for somebody who I don't know, whose translation of issues don't impact my everyday life, and who, once I see them after they're elected, they look straight through me to get to the next place. It's an issue of trust.
Right.
And I think as a faith-based community, we have to applaud the ones that continue,
Right.
that have been there, through elections, that have been there, they go to the funerals, they do all the things that are continual community service statesmen, right?
Right.
And then we have to look at that and juxtapose that against people who are running for office, right? And there's a difference. But right now, I think as a faith community in the vote, you are going to have people who look at the churches and say, "Oh, these churches going to try with the limited influence that good churches have." All right, I'm just going to be honest with you. The limited influence that good churches have, you going to tell them to vote for somebody that come by, and then once they come by, and once they get a vote, and once they get in office, they don't come by no more. But not only don't they come by no more, they don't do anything to improve the place that I call home,
Right.
or the space that I occupy within the community that I live in. That's where the accountability has to come in, right?
Right.
We got to make them more accountable, because they got to know these issues like we know these issues, like we live these issues, like we breathe these issues, and they are real issues. When you're dealing with mothers who are living in cars with their children, when you deal with mothers and fathers who are living in cars and the kids are living with grandma because they can't find an affordable place to stay. When you're dealing with families that can't find a meal every day, a healthy meal, they get the box, they ain't got nowhere to cook it. Look, this is not, I can see why people, and by the way, you asking me to vote.
Yeah, and I mean, it's amazing that you said that, because, I mean,
sorry.
I mean, just to say that when you hear these issues, when you hear a mother living in a car but yet trying to go to work, trying to take her children to school, I'm talking real life issues, and I'm like, well, how did you get my number? Well, they said you'll help me, and I called Christine. I'm saying, hey, what do we do?
What about the mother that don't have the car?
Still
trying to do all of these things.
And then what about the people who are elected that you call and say, hey, man, direct me somewhere? And nobody's calling you back. These are the issues that matters the most. These are the issues that we cannot allow elected officials to continue to say they care about, and then they display apathy.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And then we're saying we got to get out and vote. But now you got me thinking, how do we manage to say, who are we voting for, since we do stand with a little bit of influence based on, as the son said, what have you done? Not for me. What have you done for us?
I think we've got to vote them out. One, we've got to be honest. And I think the other piece is, once we can kind of, as we have trended in this conversation, get to that place of collective power amongst ourselves and unity, and we're able to move on an agenda. The other thing is, I think politicians don't take some of us seriously, because we don't have the influence per se in their spheres, because, and I think we can counter that through the grassroots operation.
And that's what's
you have-
powerful right now.
Right.
I mean, you're there, you're out in these communities, you're not only are you out in these communities, but you're hearing the needs of people in these
Mhm.
and it's not that they don't understand the power of vote. They don't understand the power of their voice. It's that they feel like it doesn't matter. One of the greatest experiences that I had when I did run for office was I met people who said, I believe you care.
Mm.
Mhm.
And because I've seen and heard what you've been doing, I never said I'll vote again, but I think because I believe you care.
Yeah.
We have to ensure that people are not at the back burner and policy is at the front.
I think another question I have, Pastor, also is dealing with the reality of, is there a such thing as serving in a particular position too long?
Mhm.
And a part of the breakdown of systems within our community is because we are not focused on passing the baton, because again, individualistic matters. Even though you didn't win the election, what did you learn? And what can be shared, as I know you do often, but what can be shared with the next runner up to take that information and to continue it on? And we have individuals in various institutions where we honor your service, but at what point can we assess whether or not have someone served, have their time expired?
I mean, it's not hard to figure out when you see the political games that politicians play over people, when you see the fear of influence that's controlling the decisions, when you see the forward and no more
Mhm.
moving up to the next levels of leadership, when you see the circle of friends and everybody else have to stand at a distance, then the heart to serve people is no longer there because now you're more engaged with making sure that donors are satisfied, making sure that those who are in your circle are satisfied and the people are suffering. I mean, that's just my and now we're this year is very critical. It's an election year. It's a year that people get out the vote, and there are some divisive methods that are in place.
Absolutely.
And there are people who are serving wonderful. I don't care if you're Republican or Independent or Democrat. If you're serving the people well, and if you're doing right by the people, then your divisive mechanisms do not change my position when I know what you're doing. But if you're in a position and you're not doing well, but you are only making sure that it's a few and your crew
Mhm.
and the people are suffering, then we got to figure out how do we rally people to get out the vote? And how do we wake up that apathy that they're having to say, I know what you've been through. I feel it. I feel it hearing the calls and advocating and getting no response.
Mm.
I feel it sitting to tables,
Yeah.
having meetings, to have other meetings that don't do nothing from the first meeting we had. So I feel it.
Yeah.
So if I'm feeling it, advocating for folk, then I know people who are not even advocating for themselves, just seeing what they see, are feeling it.
Mm.
But we have to move the needle.
Well, I think it goes back to rugged individualism. I think that unfortunately that is a plague as well on the advocacy front, right? Because we're taking issues as they come instead of bringing collective systems to bear to address multiple issues, right? If we know that this person is home is shelter vulnerable here in this way, this person is shelter vulnerable here in this way, we've got to figure out, first of all, what is the housing stock availability? What is the cost of housing? How can new housing be created that meets the needs, or housing that is in queue? How can we negotiate using public policy to create space for vulnerable people who need housing, right? Those are, it goes beyond the vote, right? It's so much bigger than the vote. By the time they get to the vote, it doesn't matter. Let me tell you who voting. The people who voting are folks who already are getting what they need from the person that's in office. The people that are voting are already people who are on the 20, 30-year trajectory of how other people plan in their communities for impact to be made. They vote because they person is in there to do, and according to the 30, 40, 50-year plan that is already in the annals of public record. We reactively get mad at folks who have to respond to folks who have a plan of action for 50 years. And that is where we get caught up, and we're frustrated because we can't deal with 2, 3, 4 issues, right, that come to us from people who we care about in our community, because we haven't put together a 20, 30-year vision for improving the communities that we represent. Listen, time is out. By the time you get to the vote, it don't matter. When you go to the polls, you should be going to the polls because you see the stuff happening, you like what's happening, and you want to keep who they're happening, making it happen, or you want to bring somebody in there who committed to keep it on making it happen. And by the time you get to the vote, it's too late. And that's where the apathy, it ain't apathy, right? And so when we're talking about churches and we're talking about advocacy, I just don't want to set people up for the okie doke. March, souls to the poll, all that stuff. But let me tell you, it's the same folk getting out there with the pictures voting. It ain't no new voters. It ain't no new people. It's the same people who own the okie doke getting out there. How you gonna get to them new, fresh people who need to vote? You're gonna get to them because they're gonna need to know what is happening that is to their benefit. And we are plugging people in to keep what's happening good happening. It's too late when it gets to the vote. It's too late.
And it's amazing you said that, because a lot of times we are discussing issues that have already been, oh God, how did I say this? I keep hurting some people. I'm just saying, we are. Here's the deal. We are on the back end of discussing matters that have already been approved without our understanding they've been approved. So I think today's show has just been great from a standpoint of we gotta vote. We don't have to go to the ballot to vote, but we gotta vote vocally.
Yes.
So that the planning process has us at the table and has our community in mind. And you know, the thing that is so amazing, Christy, is that we are listening to people who don't understand what it means for this mother to live in her car, figure out a way to get to work,
Come on now,
figure out a way to get her children to school, and yet and still keep hope, and yet and still keep believing in a process that is not able to help her. But yet I gotta listen to you tell me about a situation that you don't even have a clue to. It's kind of like, and I said this a lot of times, Caldwell, it's kind of like a bald head man trying to sell hair grease. And every time you see him, nothing is growing.
Nothing growing. And
And you want me to hear you? But the people who you need to hear, you don't hear. And I think that we at a place, and this election is critical. The local election is critical. It's critical that we change the trajectory of who we see with souls to the polls. We got to have some no people saying souls to the polls. We got to have more people souls to the polls. We got to have more people getting out to vote.
But there has to be that connection from generation to generation to where the confidence is that there's nothing underhanded, that if we're doing this together, that we have that one agenda. I am confident that when you're looking at the generations that are upcoming, that we are inquisitive. We want to know, we're going to ask questions. If you're looking at a lot of the things that are happening politically, you can see that there is an army of people in the millennial and generations beyond that are rising up and that are challenging the status quo. But I think, again, like I said, it's not a one size fit all. But I think ultimately I need to have confidence that if we're going to do this, that you've got my back.
Wow.
And I don't need to be watching my back
Because
while trying to move forward because I feel like there's something going to happen. So can I have confidence in you as we're trying to do this good work?
Well, I think, first of all, let me say I applaud you in your efforts because there are a lot of young millennial pastors, and I applaud you for gathering them together in a fellowship, educating, empowering them on the importance of not just being a voice in the pulpit, but being a voice in the pavement, being a voice at political settings, and being a voice for the people, and being a voice in the public. So I applaud you for that work that you're doing with well over 30-some young pastors, because young pastors are popping up everywhere. So I applaud you for that. And Christine, I feel like it's so important that we continue to keep having these conversations, because we have to wake up the apathy that's happening amongst our people. And like you said, that, hey, people who are voting because there's an agenda in place and we got to keep it moving. And there's some issues, there's some things that are happening within our community that we're very silent on. And because we're silent on it, I guess it's because the apathy has set in. And it's like, no need of talking about it, ain't nothing gonna happen.
Do what they want to
They're gonna
do.
do what they want to do. And I think it's time that we become the Ezekiels amongst the dry bones. We have to believe that our words are going to cause the anointing to take control and bring life to those communities of people who are feeling such an apathy. Wow, this conversation is really kind of ending sad because
Well, no. We can't end it on the side note.
It's-
Because I just want to shift the atmosphere, because there are some good things that are happening. And I want to really emphasize to people why public policy is so key and why voting is so necessary. So shout out to Brenda Williams and the Tallahassee Housing Authority.
absolutely.
It's public policy that creates the pathway for her to be able to go on rounds of funding through the State Housing Initiative Department, through the state funding mechanism for developing affordable housing. It's public policy where she's able to get gap funding through our local housing finance authority and other monies that are for housing trust associated things that come through the city and through the county. It's public policy that sets forth her accessibility to be able to, in 4 phases, take a 200-unit housing project and make it into a 400-unit multi-family, multimodal, multi-income community. And now they've opened that application up to families. They've opened it up for families to be able to apply. It's given them the ability to open up their Section 8 list. People who have been on the wait list, people who have been looking for affordable housing. Public policy drives the ability for her to do her work in supporting the needs of people in the community. So those are the things that we have to, as advocates, as faith leaders, we have to lift up, even as we call out. We have to lift up those examples of how and why it's important. Every person that benefits from that housing development needs to be at the polls.
Right, right.
They need to be there voting.
Absolutely. And I mean, here we are, we're out of time, but you bring us in on a high note.
Yes.
Because certainly we can say this about Brenda Williams over at Tallahassee Housing Authority. When people didn't believe
Come on
that
now.
she could do what she had envisioned to do, she kept believing. And those who did believe with her kept believing. And you just have to, she's an example of doing what you have to do when you believe in what you believe in. And if she was paid for the time, the hours, and the effort that she's put in, it would supersede the president's pay, because what she has done over in the South Side has really changed the
Amazing.
whole trajectory of what it looks like.
And she
And-
started in 2015. So the time factor in this is
9 years.
pivotal.
Wow. Well, listen. It's been an amazing show. And we've been talking about get out the vote, and we're talking about get out the vote in a whole lot of ways.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I mean, so certainly we want to thank our supervisor of election, Mark Early, for joining us. Had to get off for a Zoom call, but certainly thank him. Certainly want to thank Pastor Stephen Caldwell, the Empowerment Church, TLH, for joining us. And man, we're out of time, but what was the last thing you want to say to thousands of listeners that we've got?
I want to encourage you to continue to press forward. I know you may feel apathetic. I know you may feel tired, but we gain victory when we don't stop moving. That's the
Wow.
only place we can get to victory. We've got to keep moving. So keep pressing.
Thank you so much for joining us. And certainly, Conscious Chick, I mean, wow, you lift us back up. Like the song said, you lift me up. So certainly we want to thank you. And man, what would you say? I mean, as we get ready to end,
Look, we got work to do.
work to do. We got work to do. Well, listen, with that being said, listen, it's been amazing right here once again. And certainly until next week, I want y'all to enjoy your Mother's Day weekend. And don't forget now, the Tallahassee Leadership Prayer Breakfast, we are sold out.
Sold out.
You know, sold out. I mean, Katie,
Sold out.
sold out.
One time for sold out.
Sold
Lose
out.
your
I
mind
mean,
for sold out.
I mean, so we're and celebrating, and we gotta go, but we're celebrating 5 amazing pastors, and we're celebrating about 12 men from our community that are in the trenches doing amazing work. So we're excited about it, and certainly we're excited about you. You're gonna play a major role in what happens on June the 1st. So listen, until we meet back up next week, let's try to wake up the apathy
Amen.
that's in your area.
Come on now.
All right. All right, family. It's been amazing. Listen, we've enjoyed every minute of it. Pray that you've enjoyed as well. Hey, listen, we got a lot of work to do, so let's get ready to make it happen.
Amen.
Y'all